Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Meridian, watching the massive alien space station grow larger on the main screen. His hands were steady, but his heart was beating fast. This was humanity's first real chance to join the galactic community. Everything had to go perfectly. "Captain, we're getting a signal from Harmony Point Station," said Dr. Kevin Barnes from his communications post. "They're ready for us." Jake nodded and straightened his blue uniform. Behind him, Lieutenant Amy Sullivan checked her weapon one last time, even though this was supposed to be a peaceful meeting. Amy was small for a soldier, but Jake had seen her in combat training. She was fast, smart, and never gave up. "Remember," Jake said to his team, "we're here to make friends. The Corvani Empire controls half this sector of space. If we can get them to like us, other alien races will follow." The USS Meridian docked with the neutral station with a soft bump. Jake led his team through the airlock and into a world unlike anything they had ever seen. The station was huge, with ceilings that stretched up into shadows. Strange aliens walked the corridors, some with tentacles, others with multiple eyes, and creatures that looked like walking trees. But the Corvani were impossible to miss. They all stood 8 feet tall with thick green scales that looked like natural armor. Their faces were long and narrow, with yellow eyes that seemed to look right through you. Sharp claws extended from their fingers, and their tails swished behind them as they walked. When they spoke, their voices were deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "So these are the humans," said the largest Corvani as Jake's team entered the meeting room. She wore a dark red uniform covered in metal decorations. Scars crossed her scaled face, and her yellow eyes studied the humans like a hunter watching prey. "I am War Commander Zethara of the Corvani Empire," she said, not bothering to bow or shake hands. "I have heard stories about your kind. Small stories." Jake stepped forward and gave a polite bow. "I'm Captain Morrison. This is Lieutenant Sullivan and Dr. Barnes. We're honored to meet you." Zethara made a sound that might have been laughter, but it sounded more like a growl. "Honored? Look at you. You're so small, so soft. How did creatures like you ever build spaceships?" The other Corvani in the room made similar growling sounds. Jake felt his face get warm, but he kept his voice calm. "We may be different from you, but humans have accomplished many things. We've explored our entire solar system and developed faster-than-light travel in just 50 years. Tricks and tools," Zethara said, waving one clawed hand. "Any race can build machines. What matters is strength. What matters is the warrior's spirit. Can you fight? Can you hunt? Can you prove your worth with tooth and claw?" Amy stepped forward, slightly. Jake could see her jaw was tight, but she stayed quiet. Good. This wasn't the time to start a fight. "The Corvani way is simple," Zethara continued, walking around the human delegation like she was inspecting them. "The strong rule. The weak serve. This has always been true. This will always be true." Dr. Barnes cleared his throat. "With respect, Commander, we found that cooperation often works better than domination. On Earth, we've learned that different species can work together for everyone's benefit." Zethara stopped walking and stared at Barnes. "Earth? Your home world? Tell me, Doctor, what is the most dangerous predator on your planet?" Barnes looked confused. "Well, that depends on how you measure danger. Humans, I suppose, since we've become the dominant species." "Humans?" Zethara's laugh was loud and harsh. "But you have no claws, no fangs, no armor, no poison. How can you be predators? You look like prey animals to me." "We use tools," Jake said. "We work together. We think and plan. Tools, Zethara spat. Tools are for those too weak to fight, with their own bodies. A true warrior needs nothing but what nature gave them. The meeting continued for an hour, but it only got worse. Every time the humans tried to show their accomplishments, Zethara dismissed them as tricks or luck. When Jake mentioned human exploration, she called it running away from real challenges. When Barnes talked about human science, she said it. Proved humans were too weak to solve problems with strength. Finally, Zethara brought up something that made Amy's hands clench into fists. I have read your military history, the Corvani commander said. Your soldiers die so easily. In your last great war, millions of your warriors fell. Millions! A single Corvani battalion could have won your entire war in a week. Those soldiers died protecting freedom, Amy said quietly. They died because they were weak, Zethara replied. If they had been strong, they would have lived. If they had been true warriors, the enemy would have fled in terror. Instead, they fell like wheat before the blade. Amy took a step forward. Those men and women were heroes. Heroes? Zethara laughed again. They were prey that pretended to be predators, just like all humans. You play at being warriors, but you know nothing of true combat. You know nothing of real strength. The room went dead quiet. The other aliens stopped their conversations and stared. Even the Corvani soldiers behind Zethara looked surprised at how far their commander had gone. Jake put a hand on Amy's shoulder, but she gently moved it away. Her voice was calm, but there was steel in it. Commander Zethara, Amy said, I formally request a duel under Corvani Honor Code. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Zethara's yellow eyes went wide. The other Corvani exchanged shocked looks. One of them whispered something in their own language. You... What? Zethara said. Duel, Amy repeated. You say humans don't know real combat. You say we're weak. Prove it. Zethara stared at the small human woman for a long moment. Then her scarred face split into a grin that showed far too many sharp teeth. You would challenge me? You would face a Corvani war commander in single combat? I would. You know that Corvani duels are fought to yield, unconsciousness, or death? I know. Zethara's grin got wider. Then I accept your challenge, little human. We will see how long your courage lasts when you face real strength. As the aliens around them burst into excited chatter, Jake felt his stomach drop. Amy had just signed up to fight an 8-foot-tall armored warrior with natural weapons and centuries of combat experience. But when he looked at Amy's face, he saw something that gave him hope. She wasn't scared. She was planning. 3 days. That's how long Amy had to prepare for a fight that could end her life. The news spread through Harmony Point Station like wildfire. A human had challenged a Corvani war commander to single combat. Most aliens thought it was either a joke or a suicide attempt. The betting pools heavily favored Zethara, with odds of 50-1 against the human. Amy didn't care about the odds. She had work to do. Back aboard the USS Meridian, the human team turned the cargo bay into a research center. Dr. Barnes pulled up every file they had on Corvani physiology, combat techniques, and cultural practices. The main screen showed rotating 3D models of Corvani anatomy while data scrolled past in multiple languages. Look at this, Barnes said, pointing to the screen. Their scales are incredibly tough, almost like natural armor plating. But see these joints here? He highlighted areas where the scales didn't quite meet. There might be vulnerable spots. Captain Jake Morrison studied the data with growing worry. Amy, are you sure about this? We could probably find another way to handle the diplomatic situation. Amy was doing push-ups in the corner of the cargo bay, her movements steady and controlled. No, Captain. She crossed a line when she insulted our fallen soldiers. Besides, backing down now would make humanity look weak to every alien race in the sector. But she's twice your size and has natural weapons, Jake said. How can you possibly win? Amy stopped her exercise and stood up, wiping sweat from her forehead. The same way humans have always won, sir, by being smarter than the other guy, Dr. Barnes brought up video footage from the diplomatic meeting. I've been studying her movements, he said. Watch how she walks, how she gestures. The Corvani fighting style seems to be all about overwhelming force. They charge straight ahead and use their size and strength to dominate. That makes sense, Amy said, watching Zethara pace around the meeting room on the screen. Their whole culture is based on showing dominance. Subtle tactics probably seem dishonorable to them. So, what's your plan? Jake asked. Amy smiled. Remember what you learned. In military history, Captain. How did humans become the top predator on Earth? We weren't the biggest or the strongest. We weren't the fastest or had the sharpest teeth. Persistence hunting, Jake said slowly. Humans could run longer than any other animal. We would chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Exactly, and what else? Pack tactics, working together, using tools, right again. But in a one-on-one fight, I can't use pack tactics or tools. So what's left? Jake thought for a moment. Endurance, intelligence, adaptability. Now you're getting it, Amy said. Zethara is planning to end this fight quickly with brute force. But what if I don't let her? What if I make it a long fight where endurance matters more than strength? Dr. Barnes pulled up more data. According to our scans, Corvani muscle tissue is optimized for explosive power, not sustained activity. They're like sprinters, not marathon runners. Perfect, Amy said. And their culture values direct confrontation, so she won't expect defensive tactics or evasive maneuvering. Meanwhile, aboard the Corvani ship, Zethara was having a very different kind of preparation session. She lounged in her quarters while her subordinates massaged her scaled muscles. The other Corvani warriors were laughing and sharing stories of past victories. To them, the upcoming duel was entertainment, not a real challenge. How long do you think it will last, Commander? Asked one of her lieutenants, a younger Corvani, with bright green scales. Long enough for me to enjoy it? Zethara replied. The little human has spirit, I'll give her that. But spirit means nothing without strength to back it up. Should we study human combat techniques? Another warrior asked. Zethara made a dismissive gesture. What is there to study? They have no claws, no natural armor, no poison. They rely on tools and trickery because they're too weak for real fighting. But, Commander, the young lieutenant said hesitantly, the human female seemed very confident. Perhaps there's something we don't understand about their fighting methods. Zethara's yellow eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you suggesting that I might lose to a soft-skinned prey animal? No, Commander. I just thought... You thought wrong. Zethara stood up, her full height making the younger warrior step back. I have fought creatures from a dozen worlds. I have killed things that would eat that human as a snack. This will not be a fight. It will be a demonstration. The other Corvani nodded and made sounds of agreement, but the young lieutenant still looked worried. Back on the human ship, Amy continued her preparation. She sparred with holographic opponents programmed to match Corvani's size and strength. The computer couldn't perfectly simulate the real thing, but it helped her practice the tactics she had in mind. Dodge, don't block, she reminded herself, as a holographic Corvani swung massive claws at her head. Use their momentum against them. Stay mobile. Captain Morrison watched from the observation deck. Dr. Barnes, what are her actual chances? Barnes studied the combat data on his tablet. Honestly, Captain, in a straight fight, 0. But Amy isn't planning a straight fight. If she can make this about endurance and tactics instead of raw power, she might have a chance. How much of a chance? Maybe 20%. 30 if she's very lucky and very smart. Jake nodded grimly. Those weren't good odds, but they were. Better than 0. As word of the duel spread throughout the station, other alien races began taking notice. The insectoid Czech were known for their analytical minds, and they found the whole situation fascinating. How could such a small creature challenge such an obvious predator? The gaseous ethereals, who existed partially in another dimension, whispered among themselves about the strange courage of solid beings. They had never seen anything quite like this. Even the peaceful plant-like Verdani stopped their constant singing to discuss what they were witnessing. In their long lives, they had seen many acts of bravery, but this seemed different somehow. On the second day of preparation, Amy made a request that surprised everyone. I want to study human history, she told Dr. Barnes. Not military history, social history. I want to understand how we survived when everything on Earth was trying to kill us. Barnes brought up files about early human evolution. Here, he said, showing images of ancient Earth. Our ancestors were surrounded by saber-toothed cats, giant bears, massive wolves. Everything was bigger and stronger than us. So how did we win? We didn't fight them on their terms, Barnes explained. We used persistence. We used teamwork. We outlasted them. And most importantly, we adapted faster than they did. Amy nodded slowly. She thinks she knows what humans are capable of because she's seen our technology and read our military records. But she doesn't understand how we think. What do you mean? Corvani culture is about proving strength through direct confrontation, but human culture is about surviving whatever gets thrown at us. We don't just adapt to challenges. We turn them into advantages. On the final night before the duel, Amy sat alone in her quarters meditating. She thought about all the humans who had faced impossible odds throughout history. Explorers who sailed into unknown oceans. Soldiers who held positions against overwhelming numbers. Scientists who challenged, accepted wisdom even when everyone said they were wrong. She thought about her grandfather, who had fought in World War III. He was smaller than most of his fellow soldiers, but he had survived battles that killed men twice his size. When she had asked him how, he had smiled and said, Amy, the biggest guy in the room isn't always the strongest. Sometimes the strongest person is the one who refuses to quit. Tomorrow, she would find out if he was right. In her quarters on the Corvani ship, Zethara sharpened her claws and planned her opening attack. She would make it quick and decisive to show all the watching aliens that humans were nothing special. She had no idea that she was about to learn something that would change her understanding of strength forever. The Corvani Honor Arena was a circular room 50 feet across, with walls that rose up like a bowl. Hundreds of aliens filled the viewing seats, their different shapes and colors creating a strange rainbow around the fighting space. The air hummed with excitement and nervous energy. Amy walked through the entrance tunnel, hearing the roar of the crowd grow louder with each step. Her heart was beating fast. but her mind was calm and focused. She wore simple human combat gear, flexible clothing that wouldn't restrict her movement, and soft-soled boots for better grip. The arena floor was made of a rough, sandy material that would provide good traction. Amy noted the layout quickly. No obstacles or weapons, just open space. This was meant to be a test of natural fighting ability. As she stepped into the arena proper, the crowd's noise hit her like a wave. Most of the aliens were making sounds she didn't recognize, but the meaning was clear. They thought she was about to die. Captain Morrison's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Amy, you can still back out. No one would think less of you." "I'm not backing out, Captain," she replied quietly. "Too late for that now." Dr. Barnes came on the comm channel. "Remember what we discussed. She's going to try to end this quickly. Don't let her set the pace." "Got it, Doc." The crowd suddenly went quiet as Zethara entered from the opposite tunnel. The Corvani war commander was even more impressive in the arena lighting. Her green scales gleamed like polished armor, and her yellow eyes seemed to glow with inner fire. She stood 8 feet tall and moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator. Her claws caught the light as she flexed her fingers, each one sharp enough to cut through metal. Amy felt very small standing across from her opponent. The size difference was shocking. Zethara outweighed her by at least 300 pounds and had a reach advantage of nearly 2 feet. If this were just about physical power, the fight would be over in seconds. But Amy hadn't survived military training and combat operations by relying on physical power alone. An elderly Corvani in ceremonial robes entered the arena center. His voice boomed across the space as he announced the rules in several languages. Single combat between War Commander Zethara of the Corvani Empire and Lieutenant Amy Sullivan of the Human Federation. Combat continues until one participant yields, becomes unconscious, or dies. No weapons permitted beyond natural abilities. Honor and glory to the victor. The crowd erupted in cheers and roars. Zethara raised her arms, basking in the approval of her people. She looked supremely confident, like a cat playing with a mouse. Amy used the time to study her opponent's stance and movement patterns. Zethara stood upright, weight on her back foot, claws extended in a display of dominance. Classic intimidation, posture. She was trying to end the fight before it started by making Amy afraid. It wasn't working. The ceremonial Corvani raised his hand for silence. "Combatants, prepare yourselves." Amy settled into a loose fighting stance, knees slightly bent, hands relaxed at her sides. She looked tiny compared to Zethara, but there was something in her posture that suggested coiled spring rather than frightened prey. "Begin!" Zethara immediately charged forward with a roar that shook the arena walls. Her strategy was simple and brutal. Use her size and speed to overwhelm the human before Amy could react. Her claws swept toward Amy's head in a strike that would have killed instantly if it connected, but it didn't connect. Amy had moved the instant the fight began, not backward as most prey animals would, but to the side. Zethara's claws swept through empty air as Amy rolled under the strike and came up behind the Corvani's left flank. The crowd gasped. No one had expected the human to survive the first attack, let alone avoid it completely. Zethara spun around. With surprising speed, her tail whipping toward Amy's legs in a move designed to trip her up. But Amy had already moved again, dancing backward just out of range. "Stand still and fight," Zethara snarled. Amy didn't reply. She was too busy analyzing her opponent's patterns. The Corvani was fast, but her attacks were telegraphed. She relied on intimidation and overwhelming force rather than precision or tactics. Zethara charged again, this time with both claws extended in a wide sweep that covered more area. Amy ducked under the attack and moved to Zethara's right side, staying just outside the range of those deadly claws. The pattern continued for several minutes. Zethara would attack with impressive power and speed, but Amy was never quite where the Corvani expected her to be. It was like watching a tiger try to catch smoke. The crowd began to murmur in confusion. This wasn't how Corvani duels usually went. Where was the decisive strike? Where was the dominant display of strength? Zethara was getting frustrated. She had landed several glancing blows, but nothing solid. The human kept moving, kept slipping away at the last second. It was infuriating. "Coward!" she roared. "Face me properly!" Amy finally spoke, her voice calm despite her heavy breathing. "I am facing you. This is how humans fight." "This is not fighting. This is running." "On my world," Amy said, dodging another claw swipe. Persistence hunting meant following prey for hours or even days until it collapsed from exhaustion. We didn't need to be faster than our prey. We just needed to last longer. Zethara's yellow eyes narrowed as she began to understand what the human was doing. "You think to tire me out?" "I think you're already getting tired." It was true. Zethara's breathing was becoming labored and her movements were slightly less precise than they had been at the start. Her muscle structure was built for explosive power, not sustained activity. Every missed attack was draining her energy reserves. Amy, meanwhile, was just getting warmed up. Years of military training had built her endurance to incredible levels. She could keep this pace for hours if necessary. The crowd was no longer laughing or cheering for a quick Corvani victory. They were watching something they had never seen before. A smaller opponent dictating the pace of combat against a larger one through sheer tactical intelligence. Zethara attempted a different strategy, trying to corner Amy against the arena wall. But Amy used the wall itself as a tool, running up it briefly to flip over Zethara's head in a move that left the Corvani swiping at empty air. "Impossible," whispered one of the watching aliens. "How is she doing that?" asked another. In the human section of the crowd, Captain Morrison allowed himself a small smile. "Because she's human," he said quietly. Zethara was beginning to realize that she had seriously underestimated her opponent. The human wasn't just running away. She was studying every attack, learning every pattern, and slowly but surely taking control of the fight. For the first time in her long career as a warrior, Zethara began to feel something she had never experienced before in combat. Doubt, Amy sensed the change in her opponent's confidence and decided it was time to shift tactics. She had spent the first part of the fight learning Zethara's capabilities and draining her energy. Now it was time to start fighting back. The next time Zethara charged, Amy didn't just dodge, she moved forward into the attack, slipping past the Corvani's claws and landing a precise strike on a joint where the scales didn't quite meet. It wasn't a damaging blow, but it was the first time the human had landed any hit at all. The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations. The impossible was happening. The tiny human was not just surviving, but beginning to win. Zethara staggered slightly, more from surprise than pain. No one had ever moved like this against her. No one had ever turned her own strength into a weakness. She was beginning to understand that she was facing something far more dangerous than she had realized. A human being doing what humans do best, adapting. The fight changed completely after Amy landed her first hit. What the crowd witnessed next would be talked about in alien cultures for generations. Amy began to demonstrate why humans had become the dominant species on a planet where everything else was bigger, stronger, and better armed. She showed them the art of human warfare. Amy moved around Zethara like water flowing around a rock. Every time the Corvani warrior tried to pin her down, she was already somewhere else. But now she wasn't just avoiding attacks, she was countering them. When Zethara swung her right claw in a wide arc, Amy ducked under it and struck upward at the Corvani's wrist joint. When Zethara tried to grab her with both hands, Amy slipped between her arms and landed 2 quick hits on pressure points that Dr. Barnes had identified. The crowd watched in growing amazement as the small human began to take the fight apart piece by piece. "She's not just reacting anymore," Captain Morrison observed from his seat. "She's controlling the engagement." Dr. Barnes was frantically taking notes on his tablet. "Look at how she's targeting specific areas. She's not trying to overpower Zethara. She's systematically shutting down her opponent's advantages." In the arena, Amy demonstrated the first principle of human combat evolution: intelligence over instinct. Zethara fought like her ancestors had for millions of years, charging forward, using size and strength to dominate weaker opponents. It was effective against most creatures, but it was predictable. Amy fought like a human, analyzing, adapting, and exploiting weaknesses in real time. Every exchange taught her something new about her opponent's capabilities and limitations. When Zethara attempted a powerful overhead strike with both claws, Amy sidestepped and let the Corvani's own momentum carry her forward into an off-balance position. Then Amy struck at the back of Zethara's knee, in exactly the right spot to make the joint buckle. Zethara stumbled but caught herself. She spun around with a backhand strike that would have broken Amy's ribs if it had connected. But Amy had already read the attack in Zethara's body language and was moving before the strike began. "How?" Zethara gasped, breathing hard now. "How do you know what I will do before I do it?" Amy smiled grimly as she circled her opponent. "Because you fight with instinct. Humans fight with their minds." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word and movement. They were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, a physically inferior species defeating a superior one through pure tactical brilliance. Amy began to explain as she fought, her voice carrying clearly in the silent arena. "On Earth, humans weren't the apex predator because we were the strongest. We were prey animals for millions of years. Everything wanted to eat us: big cats, wolves, bears, creatures with claws and fangs that made us look helpless." She dodged another of Zethara's increasingly desperate attacks and landed a precise strike on the Corvani's solar plexus. So how did we survive? How did weak, slow, clawless primates become the dominant species on our planet? Zethara attempted a grappling move, trying to use her size advantage to pin Amy down. But Amy flowed out of the grab like liquid mercury and struck at 3 different pressure points in rapid succession. We learned to think faster than our predators could react. We learned to turn their strengths into weaknesses. We learned that every advantage has a corresponding vulnerability. The watching aliens began to understand what they were seeing. This wasn't just a fight. It was a demonstration of an entirely different approach to conflict. Amy continued her explanation while systematically dismantling Zethara's defenses. "Your scales are strong, but they're rigid. The joints have to be flexible, which makes them vulnerable. Your claws are sharp, but they make your attacks wide and easy to predict. Your size gives you reach, but it also makes you a bigger target." Zethara was slowing down noticeably now. Her attacks were becoming more desperate and less coordinated. She had never fought anyone who studied her while fighting, who learned and adapted with every exchange. Your culture values direct confrontation, Amy continued, landing another precise strike. But humans learn that the indirect approach often works better. We don't meet force with force. We redirect it. To demonstrate, Amy caught Zethara's next claw strike with her bare hands, using a technique that turned the Corvani's own strength against her. Before Zethara could react, she found herself thrown across the arena by her own momentum. The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations. Several aliens stood up from their seats, unable to believe what they were seeing. Zethara rolled to her feet, but she was clearly struggling now. Her breathing was labored, and her movements were becoming unsteady. She had never been in a fight that lasted this long, and her body wasn't designed for sustained combat. Amy, meanwhile, was just hitting her stride. Her breathing was controlled, her movements were fluid, and her tactical analysis was becoming more refined with every passing second. "The thing about humans," Amy said, advancing slowly on her opponent, "is that we never give up. Ever. We're the species that chased mammoths across continents until they collapsed from exhaustion. We're the species that turned wolves into pets and made the desert bloom. We don't win because we're the strongest. We win because we're the most stubborn." Zethara made one last desperate charge, putting all her remaining strength into a final attack. Her claws came down like hammers, fast enough to cut through steel. Amy was ready for it. She stepped into the attack instead of away from it, moving inside Zethara's reach where the claws couldn't get proper leverage. Then she demonstrated the human talent for improvisation by using moves that no Corvani had ever seen before. She struck at nerve clusters that most species didn't even know existed. She used leverage and momentum in ways that seemed to defy physics. She showed that human combat arts had evolved specifically to deal with larger, stronger opponents. In the space of 3 seconds, Amy landed 7 precise strikes on 7 different vulnerable points. Zethara's nervous system, overwhelmed by the coordinated attack, began to shut down non-essential functions. The mighty Corvani war commander, who had never lost a single combat in her entire career, felt her legs give out beneath her. She crashed to the arena floor with a sound like thunder. The silence that followed was so complete that Amy could hear her own heartbeat. Hundreds of alien beings stared down at the impossible scene, a human standing victorious over a fallen Corvani warrior. Then the crowd exploded. Aliens of dozens of species were on their feet, making sounds of amazement, excitement, and confusion. They had just witnessed their fundamental understanding of strength and weakness turned upside down. Amy looked down at Zethara, who was conscious but unable to stand. The Corvani's yellow eyes were wide with something that might have been wonder. "How?" Zethara whispered. Amy knelt beside her fallen opponent. "Because humans don't just adapt to challenges. We turn them into opportunities. Your strength became my advantage the moment you decided to rely on it instead of thinking." She stood up and looked around the arena at all the watching aliens. "That's what humans do," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "We take whatever the universe throws at us and we figure out how to use it. We're not the biggest or the strongest or the fastest, but we're the most adaptable. And in the end, that's all that matters." The crowd's roar returned, but it was different now. It wasn't just excitement, it was respect. For the first time in galactic history, humans had proven that intelligence and determination could triumph over raw physical power. The age of underestimating humanity was over. Amy stood in the center of the arena, breathing hard but victorious. Around her, hundreds of alien voices created a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very walls. But her attention was focused on the fallen Corvani at her feet. Zethara lay on the sandy floor, her massive form struggling to rise. Her yellow eyes looked up at Amy with an expression the human had never seen before on a Corvani face. Confusion, mixed with something that might have been respect. Amy could have walked away. The fight was over. The victory was hers. According to Corvani law, Zethara had lost and Amy had proven her point about human capabilities. Instead, Amy did something that no one in the arena expected. She extended her hand to help her opponent stand up. The crowd went completely silent. Even the universal translators seemed to pause in shock. In all of Corvani history, no victor had ever helped a defeated opponent to their feet. It was unthinkable. Zethara stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Her scales were torn in. Several places her breathing was labored and her pride was shattered. But slowly, carefully, she reached out and grasped Amy's hand. Amy hauled the much larger alien to her feet with surprising strength. For a moment, the two warriors stood, face to face, the massive Corvani and the small human who had just defeated her. "Why?" Zethara asked quietly. "Because the fight is over," Amy replied. "You're not my enemy anymore. You never really were." The watching aliens began to understand that they were witnessing something far more significant than just a combat victory. They were seeing a completely different philosophy of strength and conflict. Amy turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's sound system. "I want everyone here to understand something," she began. "I didn't win this fight because I'm stronger than War Commander Zethara. I'm not. She could break me in half without trying hard." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't what they expected from a victory speech. "I won because humans learned a long time ago that being the biggest predator doesn't make you the smartest one. On Earth, we shared our world with creatures that could kill us easily. Saber-toothed cats, giant bears, massive wolves. By all rights, we should have been extinct millions of years ago." Amy began walking slowly around the arena as she spoke, making eye contact with different sections of the crowd. "But we survived because we learned to think our way out of problems instead of fighting our way through them. We learned that every challenge is also an opportunity. We learned that the indirect approach often works better than the direct one." She stopped near where Captain Morrison and Dr. Barnes were sitting in the human section. Most species in the galaxy developed strength or speed or natural weapons. Humans developed something different. We developed the ability to turn disadvantages into advantages. We're not the strongest species, but we might be the most stubborn. We're not the fastest, but we might be the most persistent. We're not the most naturally armed, but we might be the most adaptable. Zethara stepped forward, her movement still unsteady, but her voice clear. "You speak of turning weakness into strength. How is this possible?" Amy smiled. "Because what looks like weakness often isn't. Being small made us harder to hit. Being slow made us more careful. Having no natural weapons made us creative. Every limitation forced us to think of new solutions." She gestured around the arena. "Look at this station, Harmony Point. It exists because different species learn to work together despite their differences. That's a very human concept. We've been doing it for thousands of years." The crowd was listening intently now. This wasn't just about the fight anymore. It was about a completely different way of thinking about strength and survival. "War Commander Zethara is an incredible warrior," Amy continued. In a straight fight with no tactics allowed, she would destroy me every single time. But humans don't fight straight fights. We fight smart fights. Zethara's scarred face showed something that might have been the beginning of understanding. You are saying that your weakness is your strength? I'm saying that humans learned to make strength out of whatever we had available, including our weaknesses. Dr. Barnes stood up in the crowd and activated his translator to full volume. If I may add something, he called out, humans are persistence hunters. On our world, we didn't chase down prey by being faster than it. We chased it until it collapsed from exhaustion. We could run for hours, for days if necessary. We never gave up. Captain Morrison also stood. And we learned to work together. The lone wolf might be impressive, but the pack always wins in the end. Humans became apex predators by combining individual intelligence with group cooperation. Amy nodded to her crewmates, then turned back to address the entire crowd. That's what I want everyone here to understand about humanity. We're not trying to dominate anyone. We're not trying to prove we're superior. We just want to survive and thrive, and we want to help others do the same. She looked directly at Zethara. When you insulted our fallen soldiers, you insulted people who died protecting that principle. They didn't die because they were weak. They died because they chose to protect others, even when it cost them everything. Zethara's yellow eyes closed for a moment. When she opened them again, there was something different in her expression. I spoke in ignorance, she said, her deep voice carrying clearly through the arena. I judged strength by the wrong measure. Your warriors did not die as prey. They died as true warriors, protecting what they valued above their own lives. The crowd erupted in surprised chatter. A Corvani war commander had just admitted to being wrong about combat and courage. But Zethara wasn't finished. She turned to face the section where other Corvani warriors were sitting. My people, she called out, we have much to learn from these humans. They have shown us that strength takes many forms, and that the greatest strength might be the wisdom to choose when and how to fight. She turned back to Amy. Lieutenant Sullivan, I formally request that you teach me these human combat techniques, not so that I can defeat you, but so that I can understand this different kind of strength? Amy grinned. I'd be honored to, Commander. But I should warn you, human training methods are pretty different from what you're used to. Different. How? Well, for starters, we usually train in groups, and we spend a lot of time learning how not to fight. Zethara looked puzzled. How not to fight? Diplomacy, negotiation, finding solutions that don't require combat at all. Humans learned that the best victory is the one where nobody has to die. Around the arena, aliens of dozens of species were having intense conversations with their neighbors. The implications of what they had witnessed were starting to sink in. Captain Morrison activated his communicator. Morrison to Meridian. Contact Earth Command immediately. Tell them the diplomatic mission has exceeded all expectations. Over the next hour, as the crowd slowly dispersed, something remarkable happened. Representatives from 17 different alien civilizations approached the human delegation with requests for formal diplomatic relations. The insectoid Czech wanted to study human problem-solving methods. The gaseous ethereals were fascinated by human persistence and adaptability. Even the peaceful Verdani wanted to learn more about the species that turned conflict into cooperation. As they prepared to leave the arena, Zethara walked beside Amy, her massive form moving more carefully than before. Lieutenant, she said, I have one more question. Yes? When you had me defeated, when you could have finished the fight permanently, why did you choose mercy instead? Amy thought about it for a moment. Because mercy is stronger than revenge. Forgiveness is harder than hatred. Building something is more difficult than destroying it. Humans learn that the hardest choices are usually the right ones. Zethara nodded slowly. Your species has much wisdom. I look forward to learning from you. As they walked out of the arena together, Captain Morrison fell into step beside them. Well, Lieutenant, he said with a smile, I think we can safely say that humanity has officially joined the galactic community. Amy looked back at the arena, then at the aliens around them who were looking at humans with new respect and curiosity. Yes, sir, she said, and I think they're finally starting to understand what makes us human. Behind them, the arena stood empty except for the sand that had been disturbed by an impossible fight. But the ripples from that combat would spread across the galaxy, changing how every species thought about strength, weakness, and the endless human capacity to turn one into the other. The age of underestimating humanity was over. The age of learning from humanity had just begun.